Welcome to the 26th Annual National Association of Environmental Law Societies Annual Conference, hosted by the Harvard Environmental Law Society. My name is Cecilia Segal. This is Genevieve Parshalle. We're the co-presidents of the Environmental Law Society. We're so thrilled that you could all be with us for this important occasion, marking the 20th anniversary of President Clinton's executive order on environmental justice. We're looking forward to the wonderful speakers and panels we have planned for the next 2 days as we reflect how far the EJ movement has come and start to work on strategies for the future. And Genevieve is going to mention a few more details about the event.
So before we dive in, I just wanted to cover a few logistical items. First and foremost, we want to thank all of our generous sponsors. We wouldn't be here today without their contributions. And if you look on the back page of your program, you will see all of our sponsors listed. We also want to thank the American Bar Association section on Environment, Energy, and Resources, who also contributed, but their name didn't quite make it before we sent the program to the printers. I also want to point out, if you look over to the side of the room here, you'll see we have compost, trash, and recycling bins. We're trying to compost and recycle as much as possible. So in your bag lunches, the plastic kind of clamshells that the pasta salad and salads came in, those are recyclable. And then the cups for the sodas and water from the other room, those are actually compostable. So please do put those in the compost bin. And then the napkins, et cetera, are also compostable. So please add those there. And then last but not least, if you have any questions during the conference, you can either find one of us or look for the students wearing dark green Environmental Law Society t-shirts, and they'll be able to direct you in the right way and answer any questions you might have. So thank you again. Oh, sorry, one more logistical announcement that I didn't want to forget. We also will be doing video recording of today's sessions, so we wanted to let you all know that, and if you're uncomfortable with that, please come find one of us or step out of the room because the recording is starting. So now we would like to introduce Dan Worth, who's actually the executive director of the National Association of Environmental Law Societies. He is a graduate of Boston University School of Law and has worked at Earth Justice and the law offices of Matthew Pawa and served as the Harvard Law School Environmental Fellow. So we're going to turn it over to Dan. Thank you.
Hello, welcome. Pretty exciting to be here, have the conference going on. 26 years is a long time. This was started by law students back in the day, so sort of a testament to student power. Very impressive. Thank you to Cecilia and Genevieve. I'd like to welcome you guys all here. I've done this for about a dozen years now, and I have to say this is one of the most impressive, well-planned and organized events I've had the pleasure of being involved in. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and the same can be said about planning an event of this size and scope. Thank you to the administration, Professor Lazarus, Professor Freeman, and Kate Konchnik for their hard work. And please join me in giving a huge round of applause to Genevieve, Cecilia, and a small village of law students that have brought us together today. And for those organizers who might be worried that you missed out on spring, blossoming flowers, warm temperatures, gentle breezes, Mother Nature appears to be holding off just for you and will probably arrive just in time for final exams. As I said, I've been at this for more than a decade now. In fact, it's been only one of 2 jobs I've held since law school. The first was as an environmental law fellow here at Harvard Law School back in 2001. At the time, I spent my days in about a 50-square-foot office in the basement of the International Law Library next door, which back then was the environmental law program. Professor Bruce Hay was teaching the basic environmental law course. The law school brought in a great group of visiting professors, including Professor Lazarus, who I'll introduce in a moment. And the public interest advising office and clinical offices did a great job of putting together a menu of opportunities. But it was largely do-it-yourself at the time. In fact, I had a student approach me during that year who will be speaking on a panel later this year, wondering why she was spending her time lobbying for a more robust program rather than learning about environmental law and policy. But thanks to the hard work and dedication of the original Harvard Environmental Law Society from 1970, students since then, and a great alumni network, things have blossomed. The program got a foothold and has since flourished. An important lesson on the power of student advocacy from within to change programs, behaviors, maybe even university endowments. Now here we sit 13 years later, and I couldn't be more pleased and impressed with how far the program has come. In 2005, the program had the good sense to hire Professor Jody Friedman. In 2009, they opened the Environmental Law Clinic under the direction of Wendy Jacobs, where she and Sean Goho now supervise dozens of students working on real-world projects. In 2011, Harvard hired longtime visitor Richard Lazarus, and in 2013 brought on Kate Konchnik, who now runs the Environmental Policy Initiative, supervising dozens of students and in her spare time helping to plan conferences like this one. Today's Harvard Law students have an unparalleled opportunity to hit the ground running under the mentorships of some of the best minds in the field. Which brings us to today in this fantastic conference. As I look out in the audience and watched registrations come in, I saw students from an enormous diversity of groups and schools. School of Government, Business, Public Health, Urban Planning, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and beyond are all represented. Many say the universities have a tendency to operate in disciplinary silos. All of you at this conference make a compelling counterargument. One also hears often about the ivory tower syndrome at universities. But as I look out, I see community activists and scholars from Dorchester to the Delta, South Boston to North Dakota. Another important counterargument, and one I hope will stick with all of you students as you hear both tragic and inspiring stories of struggle, loss, and victory this weekend. My fondest hope is that this conference can extend beyond this weekend, launching long-term friendships and relationships and creating personal and professional partnerships to tackle the glaring inequalities that still exist, environmentally and otherwise, around the country and the world. And for the many law students in the audience, your unique role, and I'm quoting from Luke Cole here, a titan in the field of environmental justice who left us too soon but will be honored later this weekend, your job is to use your training and skills to litigate, agitate, advocate, and legislate to drive equal justice for all. And to kick off this exciting weekend, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Professor Richard Lazarus. I've known Professor Lazarus for a decade and a half now, grabbing coffee with him as an environmental law fellow back in the day. And despite his brilliant mind, vast experience, and publications and speeches too numerous to list, what struck me then and still does now is his accessibility. With all the important work to be done, it's often hard to focus on the next generation and their role in the struggle. But despite work that takes them all over the world to exotic locales like Cuba, Galway, Innsbruck, Tehran, and Florence, Professor Lazarus has shown an amazing capacity to stay connected to his students, treating each incoming class as special. While I learned environmental law in a classroom, Professor Lazarus' students followed him to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. While my classmates and I read cases about the EPA, his students heard from the head of the EPA a couple weeks ago, actually. And of special note, to my knowledge, he has never turned down an invitation to a NAELS conference. Professor Lazarus served on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council from 1994 to 97, and again from 2005 to 2006. He's represented the United States, state and local governments, and environmental groups in the Supreme Court in 40 cases, presenting oral arguments in 13 of those. And after a long and impressive stint at Georgetown, he came to Harvard and now serves as the Howard J. and Catherine W. Abel Professor of Law. Will you all please join me in welcoming Professor Richard Lazarus.
Well, I want to welcome everyone to Harvard Law School and to the annual meeting of the National Association of Environmental Law Societies. Both have been around for a long time. Harvard Law School, almost 200 years, about 197 to be exact. The NAELS, this is their 26th year. This is the first time the program has ever been at Harvard Law School. Things can move slowly sometimes here at Harvard Law School. 26 years is a long time to wait. It's older than most of the students in the room. The good news is, though, what a program they put together. The theme of the program is of compelling significance, environmental justice. Modern environmental law challenged the nation in the 1970s to do no less than redefine the relationship of humankind to the natural environment, and led to the enactment of a series of radically redistributive and forward-looking laws. And then in the 1990s, environmental justice did the same to environmental law. It challenged environmental law to do no less than redefine its, environmental law's relationship to humankind, and to account for the needs, the environmental justice needs, of low-income communities and communities of color across the nation and indeed around the globe. Environmental justice has challenged the way we think about, fashion, and practice environmental law. To assess the state of environmental justice today and discuss the future and the opportunities and challenges in the future, we have an extraordinary array of speakers and panelists. They include, as we'll see, the environmental justice movement's inspirational leaders, its path-breaking scholars, its tacticians, community leaders and strategists literally from around the nation. In addition to a terrific series of panels, the conference will be punctuated by a few discrete events. The opening keynote by Dr. Robert Bullard, who I will introduce in just a moment. A moment of remembrance and celebration of Luke Cole, Harvard Law School class of 1989, activist lawyer, community organizer, scholar, and teacher. Luke tragically died in a car accident in Uganda in 2009. Luke is a role model for what one can do as an environmental lawyer, the difference that one person can make. This evening, we'll have the presentation of the law school's most prestigious award in environmental law, the Horizon Award, will go to former EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson, who more than any other administrator of EPA made environmental justice a priority at that agency. And tomorrow we'll be joined by Gerald Torres, Professor of Law, University of Texas, former Special Counsel to the U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno, who drafted the Environmental Justice Executive Order that's having its 20th anniversary today, or this month. One of the nation's most important environmental law scholars in the country, who has served as a bridge between environmental law and civil rights law. But I'm here to welcome, but I don't want you to be misled. I and my colleagues are at best eye candy for this event. This is a student-inspired event from soup to nuts. They made the bid to host. They developed and came up with the environmental justice theme. We didn't. They organized and planned the entire program. They told me what to do the welcome. And it's to those students that we on the faculty are extraordinarily grateful. Now, my immediate assignment, though, that they gave me was introduce the topic by the way of introducing Dr. Robert Bullard. And that's easy to do because I was myself introduced to both simultaneously. I had never heard of environmental justice before August 1990. Not that it didn't exist before August 1990, only that I had not heard of it, or at least I thought I had never heard of it. It had never sunk in. My professional life before then had been all things environmental law, from my freshman year in college on. Everything in college I did, everything in law school that I did, everything after law school I did, first at the Department of Justice, and then as a legal academic. Yet I had missed it. And that by itself underscored how significant the problem was. All those like me were missing it. Environmental legal academics around the country, government environmental lawyers, the environmental lawyers of the nation's leading environmental groups, were all missing it. We all missed it, though, because we didn't want to hear it. We did not want to hear that environmental protection law, which we believed was only progressive, was in fact disproportionately harming the poor and racial minorities. Not just failing to address their needs, but in some places actually making things worse for those communities. How could that be? The environmental movement, after all, grew out of the civil rights movement. Many of the same people became involved in both. The environmental movement was inspired by the civil rights movement. The Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, the Natural Resource Defense Council. No coincidence. They were all model inspired after the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They took Thurgood Marshall's playbook and they tried to apply it to environmental law. So we didn't want to believe it, but it was true. And here is how I found out. I actually remember the precise moment. Friday, August 31st, 1990, 3 p.m. I had just finished my hazardous waste class, the first week of class at Washington University in St. Louis. And after class was over, a student approached me about an independent research topic he wanted to work on. His name was Kevin Brown. Kevin was the only African-American student in that class. And he said he wanted to do a paper on whether hazardous waste sites were disproportionately located in black communities. I was stunned. No one had ever mentioned that possibility to me before. I had worked on cases, at that point for a decade. I had worked on Superfund cases. I'd been involved in hazardous waste litigation. It never dawned on me as a possibility. I said, of course, absolutely. What an interesting topic. 2 weeks later, I ran to Kevin on a Saturday morning at the law school. And I said, Kevin, how's the research going? He said, I found nothing. I've looked everywhere and I found absolutely nothing. And I said, where have you been looking? He said, the law library. I said, Kevin, it was in the law library. I would know about it. Go to the main library on campus. 1 week later, he showed up in my office. He had a huge pile of books and articles. Nothing by law professors, 0. Nothing by law students, 0. By sociologists, by Dr. Robert Bullard. Dr. Robert Bullard was the path-breaking scholar on environmental justice, beginning with his study of the siting of garbage dumps in Houston in the early 1980s in support of litigation, actually originally I think brought them by his wife, culminating in a nationwide study in a book published in 1990, Dumping in Dixie. More than any other scholar, Dr. Robert Bullard raised the nation's consciousness to environmental justice. And Dr. Bullard did not stop at scholarship. He translated his scholarship into action and to advocacy. It was Dr. Bullard's, along with others, meetings with EPA Administrator Bill Riley in 1990, which led to the creation of first the Office of Environmental Equity at EPA, and then later the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA. It was Dr. Bullard who organized the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in DC in October 1991. It was Dr. Bullard whose advocacy led to President Bill Clinton signing that first executive order for environmental justice in 1994. It was Dr. Bullard whose advocacy led to the creation of EPA's first National Environmental Justice Advisory Council in 1994, which has served as a steward for that executive order for more than 20 years. I had the privilege of being woken up by Dr. Bullard's scholarship in 1990. I had the privilege of attending the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. in October 1991 as an academic observer. And I had the privilege of serving with Dr. Bullard on EPA's first National Environmental Justice Advisory Council in 1994. And today, I have the privilege, indeed the honor, of introducing Dr. Bullard as our lead-off keynote speaker here at Harvard Law School. Born in Elba, Alabama, a graduate of Alabama A&M University, with a master's and PhD in sociology from Atlanta University and Iowa State University, and a former U.S. Marine. Dr. Bullard has served on the faculties of Texas Southern, University of Tennessee, University of California, Riverside, and Clark Atlanta University. And since 2011, he has been Dean of the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Dr. Robert Bullard.
Wow. Thank you very much, Richard. It's really a pleasure coming back and being welcomed in a law school of note, and to realize that if you do your best, as my grandmother would say, do your best, and hopefully they will invite you back. I am a sociologist by training, and I am an environmental sociologist. And I'm proud to say that I am an environmentalist. One of my heroes is W.E.B. Du Bois. I received my master's degree in sociology from Atlanta University, Department of Sociology, the department that Du Bois founded. And it's always been my goal and really to try to pattern my work after Du Bois in terms of someone who was a researcher, a scholar, political analyst, but also someone who was an activist, who would take the work, this rigorous scholarship and research, and try to make a difference. So in looking at the topic, environmental justice, and we're looking back, but we're looking forward. Environmental justice, building healthy and sustainable communities for all. I think it's important to understand that I like writing. And the way I figured, if I write it, I must get it right. So, I've written 18 books that cover a lot of areas, a lot of territory: housing, transportation, energy, sustainable development, smart growth. It's 18 books, but it's just one book. The central theme is about justice. It's about fairness. It's about equity. So when you look at this whole issue of environment, there were people who told me when I submitted that manuscript for Dumping and Dixie, publishers that would, acquisition editors. I sent this manuscript first off in 1989, and I got lots of rejections. Rejection is a mother. But there's one place that I sent it, Westview Press in Boulder, Colorado. There's something about different about Boulder. You ever been to Boulder? Mountain High? Really mountain high now. I got a stack of those letters that said you can't put environment and justice in the same sentence. There's no connection. That the environment is neutral, race and class neutral. So I set out to do some work, and it's very simplistic. It's called connecting the dots. That's a kid's game. You connect the dots, you can know exactly how the shape and the relationships, the correlations. And what the environmental justice movement did is connect the dots. And my role was a small part. Richard gave me a lot of credit for all those things, but it was a collective effort. United Church of Christ, Commission for Racial Justice, Ben Chavis, Charles Lee, Richard Moore, a whole bunch of people worked on these. Tom Goldtooth worked on these issues. Bunyan Bryant, Paul Mohai. There were a few academics, but it was a lot of community grassroots activists on the ground who saw their daily lives, their family, home, community being destroyed by pollution, by hazards. Toxins is nothing more than a nice way of saying poison. Skull and crossbones. It's a nice word, but poison. And so what the environmental justice movement did is to redefine what environmentalism is and what the environment is. The environment is where we live, work, play, learn, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. The principle of environmental justice is that every individual in this country has a right to equal protection of environmental laws, housing laws, transportation laws, energy, health, etc. And those regulations must be enforced equally across the board, whether you have lots of money or no money. And so what we said all along is that this whole idea of environmentalism being somehow the sole domain and a monopoly just by a leisure class or by individuals who had money or time or resources. We said that the environment is everything, and it's about everybody and the total ecosystem. And so, it's not that anyone decides, I'm not going to breathe next week, or I'm not going to drink water on Thursday and the rest of the week, or I'm not going to eat food. So if you talk about breathing, eating food, and this whole idea of what the environment is, for us it was very simple. And environmentalism moved beyond just having the ability to write a check and be a member of an organization that has environment in its name. Because for a long time, before 1964, there were some organizations, I'm not going to call any names, in the southern United States in the South, in Dixie, where African Americans could not join those organizations because they were segregated by law. You could not join. And so if you did a research project and you surveyed organizations that are environmental organizations, and they come back with this data that says African Americans are not environmentalists because they're not members of any organization, your data is flawed. If you take a class from university and it's an environmental class and there's nothing taught in that class, environmental policy or environmental law or environmental ethics, et cetera, and there's nothing in that about some equity issues or justice issues, that course is flawed. That's what we were saying all along. So when we talk about how I got involved was accidental. I was an accidental environmentalist. Is that a movie? Anyway, I graduated from Iowa State University, and my first job in 1976, that was long ago, before most of you were born. And my first job was in Houston, Texas, at Texas Southern University, University where I am now. 1976, I moved to Houston. 2 years out of graduate school, my wife asked me, now I was an untenured assistant professor working at a state university. And my wife came home one day, this is in Houston now, and said, Bob, I have sued the state of Texas, the city of Houston, Harris County. I said, you sued my employer. She said, yes. And I said, well, what is it about? She said, I have sued this company. I'm not going to call any names, but the initials are BFI. Wanted to put this landfill in the middle of this predominantly black community in Houston, Northeast Houston. Predominantly black suburban neighborhood. Now, when I say predominantly black, that's like me saying my family is predominantly black. This was an all-black neighborhood, and how do we know Jim Crow did it? Northwood Manor. Where this landfill was nothing but black people, trees, and houses. 85% of the residents own their homes. It's not a ghetto, no industry. Now, Houston is unique, and it's still unique. It was unique in 1978, it's unique now. This is the only major city in this country. It's the fourth largest city in this country. It does not have zoning. Zoning is a regulation, a place for everything and everything in its place. Decisions that are made based on high and best use of the land. And theoretically, you would not, and practically, you would not put a landfill next to a residential. You would have some separation, buffers. But in this case, they put this sanitary landfill. We know there is nothing sanitary about a landfill. That's where garbage goes. So my wife sued this company, and she sued the city, and she sued the state, and she said, Bob, I need somebody. I just sued this company, and I just sued the state of Texas. I need somebody who works with census data and who can track and figure out the history of landfill and solid waste siting in Houston from the very beginning up to 1978. I said, you need a sociologist. She said, that's what you are, right? I said, yeah. That's how I got involved in this. Accidental environmentalist. Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corp., 1979. That was the first environmental racism lawsuit that used the Civil Rights law to challenge the siting of a facility. I did a study in 1979. I had 10 graduate students in my research methods class. And we basically designed a methodology for plotting and locating landfills in Houston. And now this was before computers. I had an Apple IIe computer for my kid. Had 64K. Useless. We ran the data on punch cards. IBM punch mainframe. We used windshield surveys with maps and charts. I got old archival records from the city and the county and the state. We had flat-based maps. We had magic marker pens, red, yellow, green, and orange. We had map pens. We had census tract data and block data that was in a map book that was thick where you pull out the paper. This is ancient. Chisel and a hammer. I told my students, I said, I gave them their list where we had compiled. I said, go out and do a windshield survey. I said, anytime you see a mountain in Houston, be suspicious. Landfill. Houston is flat. Large part of it is below sea level. Anytime you see a mountain, it's a landfill. We were able to do this study, and what we found is that 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills were located in predominantly black neighborhoods. 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators. 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills, 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators, and 3 out of 4 of the privately owned. 82% of all the waste being disposed in Houston from the early 30s up until 1978 was located in predominantly black communities. Blacks only made up, from that period up to 1978, 1935 up to 1978, made up only 25% of the population. If you're getting 82% of the waste and you're 25% of the population, that is disparate impact. That is disproportionate impact. You get more than your fair share of garbage. That was the argument. We went to court. African-American lawyer, my wife, representing African-American plaintiffs. I'm the expert witness. I'm African-American. We were in front of a judge. First, it was in front of the only African-American female federal district judge in Texas. And it stayed in court up until it was getting ready to go to the real trial. And it was transferred out of her court and transferred into the senior judge, who must have been 150 years old. He was calling us Negras. This is 1985. Now, and this is in the South. Anytime you get called a Negra in the South, you know what that is. The company had at least a half dozen lawyers from one of the largest law firms in this country, Fulbright and Jaworski. Fulbright as in Fulbright Scholar, and Jaworski as in Leon Watergate. This is maybe too old for you to remember, but they had 7 lawyers representing then there was Mike Blank. But again, this whole idea of challenging this location. The name of the landfill was, get this, sounds like a subdivision, Whispering Pines. And so I did this study, and I wrote it in a book called Invisible Houston. And again, this whole idea of, this was done before there was a national movement. And there were lots of isolated incidents like this occurring in the country where communities were fighting. So I don't want to make this unique in terms of Houston. It was happening all over the country. But it was not until 1982 that one incident galvanized this whole country in terms of environmental injustice, environmental racism. That was Warren County, North Carolina, and where this contaminated oil was dumped along the highways. It had to be scooped up in 1978, and they needed a place to put it. They went through this rigorous process of identifying the best place to put it. North Carolina has 100 counties, and for some reason, when they opened the envelope, and the winner is Warren County, one of the poorest and one of the blackest counties in the state. And so Warren County became a lightning rod for this issue of environmental injustice, environmental racism. Over 500 people were arrested. This was the first time that many people were arrested protesting landfill or an incinerator or a facility. United Church of Christ did this study in 1987, and what they found is that race was the most potent predictor of where these hazardous waste facilities were located. They did a multiple regression analysis. They controlled for a number of variables, and when they looked at the results, race was more important than property values, land ownership, whether or not you had a high income, low income, no income, and so it was race. And so this was a protest of young people, students, putting their bodies on the line, trying to stop these trucks from dumping this poison, PCBs, not something you want to sprinkle on your Cheerios, poison in this community. This was such a great photograph. This is in the Charlotte Observer newspaper. Such a great photograph. I said, that's such a great photograph. That should be on a book. So when I did Dumping in Dixie, well, it was on the book. And what we found is that the accident, that there was no accident, that what was happening all over across the country. When I did Dumping in Dixie, I expanded Houston and went to Dallas, all the lead smelters in Dallas. Something about it just happened to be located in mostly African-American communities. Went to Louisiana, along Cancer Alley, disproportionate number of facilities located where African Americans. I went to West Virginia, and there are a lot of people who didn't even know there were black people in West Virginia, but this company found them. As a matter of fact, this little town was a result of black people leaving Virginia after slavery, and they went, because West Virginia broke away from Virginia and became free. And black people said, hell, I'm going with freedom. And they moved across and went and settled this one little area in the Kanawha River Valley. And West Virginia needed a place to put its Jim Crow University, or Jim Crow School, in the 1880s, and they put it in Institute. And West Virginia Colored Institute, that's how Institute gets its name. And I went there and did the study in Institute. This company was the only company that manufactured methyl isocyanate, MIC, the same stuff that killed all those people in Bhopal, India. The only place that was manufactured in this country was in Institute, and Institute has always been 95% black. So when you talk about this issue of civil rights and equal protection, and the fact that people of color somehow were left out of the environmental movement, somehow we were invisible. And so what it meant that we had to basically develop a parallel movement where people of color basically said, we will speak for ourselves and decide for ourselves. And the United Church of Christ, Commission for Racial Justice, pulled us together. Ben Chavis pulled us together, leaders from all across this country, and said, we have to do for ourselves and speak for ourselves. The first principle of environmental justice is that people must speak for themselves, and the people most impacted must be in the room to speak for themselves. We developed the summit, and out of this summit came first 17 principles. It was a 4-day summit. The first 2 days, it was just people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, Asian and Pacific Islanders, and Latinos. We said, we got to meet among ourselves, people of color, because we don't know anything about each other. We got stereotypes of each other. So we have to unpack this slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, imperialism, colonialism, and all these other isms so that we can get ready for the white people to come in the room. Because, you know, anytime you got people of color in the room, one white person can change the dynamics in the room if it's dynamics. And so, first 2 days we said we gotta get together, and know each other. And the next 2 days we open it up to everybody because we are not going to follow the same path. We're going to be inclusive. And we developed those 17 principles. We planned the conference for 500 people, and 1,000 people showed up. Anytime you got this is 1991 in October. Anytime you got 1,000 people in Washington, D.C., you got to have a march. You got to have a demonstration. That's mandatory. That's in the book. And so we did. And so what was the government response to all this organizing, mobilizing on the ground from grassroots groups up? And as I said, as an academic, what I did was to support the movement. When people call me and say, Dr. Bullard, I need a study, I need a survey, I need you to do this analysis, I need you to do this. And if I could, being an ex-Marine, I don't jump out of planes. In Atlanta, I used to take Delta. Now it's United in Houston. But anyway, I go to where they are. And the idea is that the movement was built from the bottom up. So when we were having this conference in Arlington, 1994, it was a National Institute of Environmental Health Science conference, EJ conference. Race and the incidence of environmental hazard, that was 1990 at University of Michigan. And then in 94, we had a follow-up conference, national conference. It was over 1,000 people at this conference, 300 subsidized scholarships with people of color groups. In order to get there, we need scholarships. Otherwise, they had planned it for, NIEHS had planned the conference for 300 academics and scholars, and there were only 3 of us invited. We said, no, we're not going to a meeting. I said, I'm not going to no meeting dealing with environmental justice and health issues, and it's just three of EJ folks sitting in the room. And so we took a year to plan the meeting, and then we planned it right. And then the second day of the meeting, some of us got a call from the White House, got calls. We didn't believe it. My call was, I thought it was a joke. You need to come over to the White House, we're going to do a ceremony. Who is this? Anyway, I thought it was a joke. So we went over there. It was in February, it was cold, snow. Went over there, the signing in the White House, in the Oval Office. Nice office. We got pens. I still have my pen. We took pictures, stand-up pictures, and then we left and went back to the conference and talked about, well, what does that mean? We have an executive order on environmental justice, and it was signed 20 years later. Oops, back up. 2014 has special significance. It's the 20th anniversary of the executive order, and it's also the 60th anniversary. It's important because it's the 60th anniversary of Brown, 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and I think after the executive order, there are some things that started to happen. In 1993, there was only one state that had a law or executive order that, or a policy that dealt with environmental justice. There's only one state that was New Hampshire. I don't know why is New Hampshire first in a lot of things. Anyway. It's not. Well, first primary. Okay. Well, it's not. Okay. Well, anyway, New Hampshire. In 2007, by 2007, it was 41 states. In 2014, all 50 states have some type of environmental justice, executive order, or policy. Now, it doesn't mean that all of them are created equal. There are some states that's got them. I won't call any names, but like Louisiana, I'm gonna call them out. Louisiana and Texas and Tennessee, Georgia, they got those executive orders and laws, but in some cases they are worthless. So all states are not the same. In 1990, Dumping and Dixie was the only book. 1992, Dumping and Dixie and Paul Mulhey's and Bunyan Bryant's book. By 1994, there was 5 books on environmental justice. 2014, there's hundreds of books. If you Google, hundreds of books, all kinds. In 1994, there are 4 EJ centers. All 4 of them were at black colleges. Today, there are dozens of centers at universities, 22 legal clinics, 6 degree granting programs in environmental justice. Organization. When we did the People of Color Directory in 1994, there were 300 EJ groups of color, or EJ groups. In 2014, there are more than 2,000. In 1994, there were 2 people who had won national awards, like Goldman or Heinz, stuff like that. In 2014, we're talking about more than 24 groups or individuals that have won these national awards. Now, we've made a lot of progress, but we've got a lot to do. In 2014, like in 1994, zip code is still the most potent variable factor to determine health. You look at your zip code, and you can almost predict how healthy you are. And wealth and health are correlated. If you look at vulnerability, I'm going to go through these maps quickly because I know my time is limited. There are all kinds of belts. I did this talk in Bogota, in Colombia, and I couldn't use belt because they didn't translate well. I guess it's corridor, the corridor. There's a black belt, which is counties that run from Virginia all the way across, predominantly black counties. A lot of them correlated with high concentration of black people and slavery, but black belt was not given because of race, it was because of the dirt. You could almost grow anything. But there was a correlation between the color of the soil and the predominance of people. There's a Latino belt. There's a poverty belt, pollution belt. There's a fat belt. No, I should say obesity belt. There's a diabetes belt. There's a stroke belt, uninsured belt, and there's a Bible belt. I'm going to show you these belts. This is the minority population, heavily blue. This is the Latino belt. If you look at the concentration, that heavy red area, mostly Latino, Southwest and West. African Americans concentrated in the North Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic, Gulf Coast. 1990 population, people of color, there's a certain, that high, dark area, that's where people of color are concentrated in 1990. 2040, magic year 2042, people of color will be the majority. Look at the concentration. Heavy concentration in certain states, certain geographic locations. Very predictable as to what population is. This is the poverty belt. High red concentration represents high poverty. If you look at minimum wage, there's a correlation. Look at the yellow areas. Those states that said minimum wage, what you talking about? We need to work people for free. There is I went through the poverty belt. There's another poverty belt. That's the heavy blue area. I put this in because I want you to flip to the next, put this mental picture, poverty belt and religiosity belt, Bible belt. Look at the high correlation. Here's the electoral. This is no red state, no blue state. Yes, we got red states and blue states. Look at the red states and blue states. Concentrate on that map. And look at the 10 healthiest states. Look at what health is. Now, we were in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is considered one of the healthiest states. Now, this is not my data. This is United Health Foundation data. Look at the orange area. Is that orange or yellow? Whatever that is. It's not blue. Look at those states, healthy. The unhealthiest states. Look at that, the heavy blue area, that's the southern tier states. And Mississippi and Louisiana, they fight each year as to who's going to be on the bottom. There's a stroke belt. That heavy area, look at the stroke belt. Lung cancer distribution. Look at the heavy concentration of lung cancer. Heavy dark areas. Look at the uninsured belt. That heavy green area. Look at the states that fought Obamacare and went all the way to the Supreme Court and got slapped down. Look at the heavy blue states across the South and some of the areas up. Here's a state where no expansion of Medicaid. Start getting this mental picture, heavy dark areas, counties. Look at the Medicaid expansion by states. Again, that's another configuration, heavy dark areas. Look at the counties rankings, fast food restaurants by counties. Look at the percentage of obese population. Look at the southern tier states, and look at Mississippi. Mississippi is the fattest state. For some reason, we don't know scientifically, but look at Colorado. It's the skinniest. Something's going on with bean sprouts, tofu, and marijuana, I guess. Look at food hardships. This is by congressional district, heavy pink areas where they have the hardest, well, food. There's food insecurity. If you don't have money for food, there's food insecurity. Look at the areas where there's no car and no supermarket. Food deserts. Look at the heavy, dark concentrations. You overlay these maps, and you get the picture. Toxic waste and race, we updated a report in 2007, 20 years later. The problem has gotten worse because in 1987, 34% of the residents who live within a 2-mile radius of these hazardous waste facilities were people of color. By 2007, 20 years later, that number had moved to 56%. So you go from 34 to 56%. When you look at the clustering effect, that is the population that's living around facilities that are where you have 2 or more, and generally in the real world, it's not just one, it's a whole bunch of them. That number jumps to 69%. Race is still the most potent variable for predicting these facilities. African Americans are more likely than white, 79% are more likely to live in industrial pollution areas. In 19 states, Latinos in 12 states, and Asians in 7 states. This is not just a poverty issue. There's one study done in 2008 from the University of Colorado showed that affluent African Americans, it is black folks who make $50,000 to $60,000, are more likely to live in more polluted neighborhoods than whites who make $10,000. You say, how can that be? It's easier for a poor white person to put on a suit, dress up, and go get housing in areas where you don't have these facilities, because it may be difficult to distinguish in terms of affluent versus poor when it comes to race for a certain population. So it's not just, let me go back. Poster child. I worked on this stuff for 30-something years, and the one that sticks out, the one case that has the most data, that is the most documented, 1,200, 1,500 pages on EPA's website that show what was done over the years. So I call it the poster child. And it's Dixon, Tennessee. And Sheila Holt Orsted is on the program. I just saw her in the audience. This is a case where you had clear documentation in black and white where letters were sent to white people say, don't drink the water that's got TCE in it, trichloroethylene. Nasty stuff. Not something you want to, drink. And so they sent similar letters to black people said, your water is safe to drink. No harm. Go ahead, drink it. And you go through these documents, one after the other, and do a global search. This particular case in Dixon, Tennessee, in Eno Road, where black people own 150 acres of land and been out there since right after slavery, 5 generations, and have been poisoned, and you show that this whole family well has got TCE in it. It's got another contamination in it. Okay, drink the water. And so you start looking at the fact that the government, this is the poison well, this is the warning that was put in the white people's spring. This spring contains TCE above USEP maximum contaminants level. exposure through dermal contact or ingestion could pose a risk to human health. And that Sheila standing in front of the sign that's in the white people's well on their property, but there's no such sign in black people. The U.S. Geological Survey in this process also sampled wells within a 2-3 mile radius of this particular landfill that leach TCE into the groundwater. They sampled all of the wells. They sampled duck ponds. They sampled the dog pound, where 300 dogs each month was waiting on death row to get euthanized. They sampled the dog's water, but they would not sample this family's well, this black family's well that was 54 feet from this particular landfill. 54 feet is like from here to that building, only separated by a fence. And so the family filed a lawsuit in 2011, and it took 8 years, almost 9 years. It was finally settled. But the fact is that family has the health toll. Their property, their land, their homestead has been destroyed. It's been in there since, as I said, since slavery, been destroyed. And so when you talk about these issues, fence line, you talk about mapping vulnerability and mapping injustice, and you can map it all the way from air quality to power plants, to which states don't want to participate in renewable energy. Look at the white. The white, not racial, look at the white. White is bad up there. Green is good. Look at the states where it's white, and mostly the southern states and states that resisted civil rights, states that resisted equal protection, states that resisted environmental. I mean, this pattern is clear. Dirty power plants, big problem. Coal plants, we're moving to clean energy, but coal plants still pose a disproportionate burden on communities of color. Dirty dozen, communities of color basically predominate around these facilities. If we talk about clean coal, no, Mr. President, there is no such thing as clean coal. That's oxymoronic. And so they're trying to put, okay, the first place they want to put a clean coal plant in the country, the experiment is in, what do you think? The poorest state in the country, Mississippi. I mean, it's like 60% of the residents who live near this plant are people of color. And so when you talk about nuclear power plants had not been built in 30 years, okay, nuclear power industry wanted to remake their image. They want to come out with a new kind of image and say, let's build some new plants. The first place they roll out, what do you think? Burke County, Georgia, Waynesboro, Georgia, in a mostly black town that already has 2 nuclear power plants, and now they want to put 2 more. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Why is it that one little black town is going to end up with 4 nuclear power plants? And it's being used as a guinea pig to say, okay, we can have nuclear power, even after Fukushima. So when we talk about the right to pollute, I'm winding down. Cars give us liberty, but they also give us something else. Everybody their cars are not randomly distributed. There's some population that don't own cars. Why would anybody own a car in New York City? But most places are not New York City. A lot of places in this country, you almost need a car. And so when you talk about this whole question of pollution and who pollutes, there are a lot of people who breathe other people's air. And we call that drive-by pollution. I can say that because I'm not in LA. So when you talk about these issues, going green, green cars, there is no such thing as a green Humvee. And so when we talk about green transit, people of color are more likely to ride transit. So we need to change the way we spend our dollars to make sure that more money is spent on transit and alternatives to driving, as opposed to just building roads. You build the roads, this is another book that I wrote called Highway Robbery. I like titles like that. And we know that if you move away from cars and clean up the air, like in '96, we couldn't drive our cars in Atlanta, we had to ride MARTA. The air was cleaner, the asthma rate went down, hospitalization emergency room went down. We know that when you clean up the air, cities that clean up the most get the most bang for the buck. On average, you get 5 more extra months of living. I know at 66, I want my extra 5 months. You build the roads and they will come, the lanes will fill up. You know, there's a relationship between when gas is high, arm and a leg. I mean, it's like roads to nowhere, bridges to nowhere, going green. We know that we call outdoor apartheid. All green is not the same. We love our children playing on parks, but in many cases, our kids are playing in parks next to landfill, Norco, Louisiana. Louisiana, Houston, a school located across from one of the largest refineries. That's Carver Terrace. Port Arthur, Texas. Carver as in George Washington, Peanut Carver. We know who lives in that project. So when we talk about these issues, the vulnerable population is our children. Our asthma rates are at epidemic proportions, and the fact that if we are to address these issues in terms of becoming a healthier, livable, and more sustainable communities, we must address these legacy issues that are left over from the past. And the fact that we're celebrating 20 years of the executive order, we have more involvement at our universities, we have more students involved, we have more courses, we have more organizations that are working on these issues, but we still need more people who care about making change. Thank you very much. Sure.
So we would love to open it up. That was a phenomenal introduction to this conference. We hope that gave you a great overview of what we need to talk about for the next 2 days. So many of those topics that you mentioned, asthma, food, we're going to dive deep into all of those tomorrow, so stick around. And we're just going to open it up for about 5 minutes of questions right now. So.
Thanks for a great talk and really important information. The one metric, if you will, that isn't on your in your analysis, but I think it's obviously implicit, is powerlessness. So I'd ask you to talk about power and powerlessness, the powerlessness belt, if you will, and how that relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I wrote a book on that, as a matter of fact. The powerlessness issue runs throughout all of those maps, and the movement, the environmental justice movement, is a movement about empowerment. It's about making sure that people have information in a user-friendly way and in a timely friendly way, so that they can take that information and act on it. And so if a proposal of a facility, jobs, is presented to them, the analysis, the counter-analysis is, how can you dissect that proposal? And if you can dissect it, communities can dissect it, and basically say that what's being presented is bogus, and if they organize themselves and mobilize themselves to prevent that from happening, that's power. Again, I have lots of cases of power, but so it runs throughout. That's a given. The fact that if you get people organize and mobilize and get them ready to speak for themselves, not about speaking for anybody, for speak for themselves, that's about building power. Our movement is about building power across generations. We're talking intergenerational, building leadership that can stand and withstand. They call it building nets that work. And Luke used to say all the time, we talk about lawyers and say how lawyering can be disempowering. But the fact is that the EJ movement basically coined this phrase, lawyers on tap, not on top. The community, the organizations, the people who are fighting for, that's where the power should lie. And the law and the lawyer is just one tool to be used. There's another map that I didn't include, and I didn't include it for a good reason. It's the stupid belt. Yes, ma'am.
In your research, did you find any injustice for Native Americans?
Oh yes, if you look at a lot of those maps, there are areas in terms of where the concentration of Native Americans are. If you look at the Plains area, look at in New Mexico and Arizona, the Four Corners, and I've done cases. I've been expert witness on a number of cases on Navajo, Eastern Navajo, dealing with uranium mining, tailings, water quality issues. And lots of issues. So when you break it out, for some reason we just don't know, these these environmental externalities somehow follow the demographic population. I had another map, but I didn't put it up here. The map, the fracking map, you know, I call it the frick fracking map. It shows you where the fracking is going on and where the shale is located. And what's happening now is it's changing that whole picture, in that there are communities now that are involved in disputes with, on the fracking issue, communities that never would show up on these maps when it comes to these other environmental problems. So the fracking issue has now expanded the map in terms of environmental disputes. And a lot of these areas where the fracking is going on, these are not people of color communities. In some cases, these are not poor communities. And so when you talk about, but the environmental justice paradigm is being overlaid on these new EJ communities, because people are saying, we thought we had the right, our property right, we thought we had the right to live our lives out, and not having somehow somebody coming in and saying, we want what's underneath your feet, what's underneath your house, and you don't own any of that, and so you got to get the hell out. That people are now translating that into environmental injustice and using that paradigm, using that framework. Yes, sir.
Piggybacking off that part of this conversation, what can be done in communities where these power plants are literally the lifeline of the community in terms of jobs, in terms of tax base, and then community is sort of like stuck with this power plant. If the power plant goes away, then the community's lost the jobs, lost the taxes.
Okay, first of all, you're assuming that the power plant is the lifeline of the residents who live there. Oftentimes, they're not. People drive in 8 hours and drive out. The people who live on the fence line are not employed. There's a recent study that was done by the NAACP looking at the number of businesses that are black businesses and blacks who are employed at these industries. We're not employed. If you look at Kansas, Louisiana, the plants that the people who live closest to the plant, they could walk to work, they could go out across the fence. Those jobs are not for them. And so people drive in, work 8 hours, or in some cases work overtime, and they drive out. The people are left who are on the fence line are left with poverty, pollution, and illnesses. And so when you start to make the assumption that, oh, if you close the plant, you're going to hurt the people, that's the argument we call that the South African argument. Oh, we need to keep apartheid, because if you dismantle apartheid, you're going to hurt the very people we're trying to help. So the issue is that the people that are being poisoned, and the people that are basically with the trucks, not just the power plant, but the diesel trucks that are running in and out, spewing the pollution. So if you're going to green up, clean up, and what we say, if you're going to talk green or talk clean and act dirty, that's unacceptable. And what's happening now, there's a lot of green talk being taught, but there's no implementation. Most of the dirty power plants that are now people are stuck with, they're stuck in poor communities and communities of color. And if you look at the newer facilities and greening, there's an equity issue in terms of renewables. And what we're saying is that if we talk about a green economy, we need to make sure that green economy is spread throughout. Particularly when we talk about our changing demographics and looking at retirements and baby boomers, we need to get people in training into those jobs, to fill those jobs, so that we are truly talking about opportunity. That's all. Right here. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question, and then we're going to move on.
Yes.
Thank you. Being that this is a student-led conference, I'm wondering what you feel most that students and young professionals interested in environmental justice can do, and what is our role in the next 20 years going forward?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. I'll pay you after this meeting. Every social movement that has been successful in this country has had a strong youth and student component. And this movement is no different. Students, if you look at Warren County, the young people laying in front of those trucks, those are students. Some are high school students and some are elementary school students, college students. So I think that become active while you're in college, while you're in school, participate in student organizations, but also link up with some organizations in communities that are working on all kinds of issues. Students have a lot of resources. They have a lot of time, and you can get them at a good rate. And the fact is that organizations need having community university partnerships. That is the strongest part of our movement, I think, because a lot of communities don't have resources to do the science and do the this and that and the other. And so students and organizations matched up, and having professors work with students to match them up with kinds of needs that are in the various communities, not just the U.S., but abroad. And I want everybody to know that the issues that I'm talking about, EJ is a global movement. I just dealt with the domestic part this year. But I think students, very important. And to understand your role and to understand that one student and one person can make a difference. It's very important that you understand that. And being at this law school, I mean, it's very important because when you leave, you take with it, a lot. And I think that can mean a lot by working with communities and stakeholders that are out there, educating them about these issues. And you don't have to be a community activist. You don't have to be on the front line. There are things that you can do that can support movement building across, whether it deals with energy issues, whether it deals with climate issues, transportation issues, food security issues, issues dealing with young people, getting more young people interested in STEM, or whatever. We need more role models that young people serving as mentors to young people. So that's my message. And it really excites me when I see students, when I get a chance to speak in front of students, because you never know who's in the room listening. Maybe 5 years from now, somebody will say, whoa, Dr. Bullard, I heard what you said. Now I'm a toxicologist. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm a lawyer. I'm a community organizer. I'm a president of a bank. Oh, you are? Thank you very much.